Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. My name is James Carter and in today's video I'm going to be talking you through how I painted this realistic looking oil painting of Zendaya using the ALLA PRIMA method with relatively cheap brushes. So first off, what is ALLA PRIMA? ALLA PRIMA is an oil painting technique known as ALLA PRIMA, but it basically entails you painting wet on wet, which is exactly what it sounds like. Wet on wet painting is you're not waiting for one layer to dry and then applying a next layer. You're using maybe 2 layers maximum, but you're still not letting it dry completely. It's still relatively wet and it enables you to create some really truly amazing blending techniques and some really looking good textures. So let's dive straight into the video. I hope you enjoy.
So just as I will do for pretty much any portrait or painting, just any painting that I'll do really, I will always start out with these thumbnail sketches, or I wouldn't really call them thumbnail sketches, they're more just ideas getting down on sheets of paper. Thumbnail sketches, a very small drawing that's very scratched together, whereas these are a little larger drawings that I've comprised on one sheet of paper and I just take down the composition and the tonal values that I'm looking for in this painting. So with a lot of other portrait paintings that I've done in the past, I've never managed to get a lot of contrast and the tonal values quite right. Tonal values I'm 50-50 with, but tonal contrast is something I've often struggled with in the past, and so I thought that this painting would be an ideal opportunity to really go in depth with that tonal contrast and how it would work and how it would look. So I was scrolling through Google and found 3 different photographs of Zendaya that I really liked and I thought would make a fantastic portrait painting. And so I took all 3 and I've put them all down onto this one sheet of A3 paper. Each one is just drawn with this mechanical pencil with some 2B lead. And as you can see, I'm not going into detail too much with them because that's the idea of a compositional sketch, is you're not trying to get the details down, you're just trying to work on this composition, and for me, I'm working on that tonal contrast as well. As you can see, I've put in a little bit of shadows and a little bit of line work, but nothing too detailed, nothing too in-depth that's going to really stand out. The way I often work when I'm doing a thumbnail sketch or a portrait sketch or just any form of sketch that I'm trying to work out the composition for, not doing a full-scale drawing that's meant to go wow, is I'll put down some ideas and then one of them will stand out to me subconsciously and I'll work into it a little more. With this one, you'll see exactly which one I've worked into a little more, and it will be the 3rd one because I don't quite know what it is. I think it was the whole way the composition worked for this 3rd one, and I do want to point out as well that this photograph that I'm using is not mine. I do not own it. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the original copyright owner and I couldn't find out who originally took the photograph. I'm not sure if it was taken for a magazine or if it was taken for her Instagram. I really have zero idea. I did try and find it, but in the end I couldn't find it. I've got very little idea. I don't know, so I apologise. If anybody does know the original copyright owner, please comment and I will make sure 100% to give them full credit for that photograph. For me personally, I quite enjoy painting and drawing celebrities and people, but in general, taking your own photographs, especially with lockdown and COVID, and especially for a celebrity, it's very challenging to be able to take your own photographs of somebody. So more often than not, I will use somebody else's photograph for this, and I will always make sure that it's not going to get me in a lot of trouble. And copyright, you do have to look out for that. But with this, I'm not too sure who is the original copyright owner, and I do apologise. Please, I will give full credit if somebody can let me know who owns the photograph that's the original photograph. But anyway, starting on this 3rd little portrait sketch, I'm not too sure what to call it. I'll just call it a tonal contrast sketch put together thingy-mabobby, because that's all I can really think of for it. I'm just going through it and putting down what I see from the photograph, and I'm sketching off from my tablet, which is in the top left hand corner. You can't see it at the moment, unfortunately, but it's not just a full-on trace. You are actually sketching it. You are seeing the way her head is formed, how her eyes are formed. It's all of those individual features you really want to look for. Now, I am working into each one a little more. As you can see from the first one compared to the second one, you can definitely see that I've put in more contrast and some more, not tonal values, but what stands out a little more. That is something that I tend to do more often than not, unfortunately, and quite often one of the last ones that I will do, I work into a lot more than any of the other ones that I've drawn, and so that tends to usually be the one that I go for to make into a painting or full-scale drawing. Now, it is very, very important that you do development work and sketches for your pieces of work, especially paintings, because drawing and painting are two completely separate things, but yet you still want to be able to have that little thumbnail sketch to go, these are the ideas that I've thought about, these are what improvements I've made, and this is how it's going to develop in the painting itself. A lot of this is very hard to explain, and it's also very hard to show visually, but you have a better chance of showing it visually than you do by explaining it to people. So I will always 100% recommend that if you're going to do a painting of any form or any sort, do a thumbnail sketch, and one of the biggest factors that it helps me for is knowing how I'm going to go about actually creating this portrait. You can find out exactly where those tonal values are going to be, how they're going to look, and you get to experiment with, oh, what if I do this, or what if I do that? And with this, you can see that I've made her skin tone very, very dark, and so in the painting itself, I realised, okay, this is something I've got to change, and so I do. But also at the same time, you'll be able to see a lot of the qualities that I've taken from this original sketch over to the canvas, and that's all that's left to do from these sketches, is to transfer that final one onto the canvas. So let's go do that then. So now that's been transferred over to the canvas and fully drawn out, you can see just a few little sketch marks on the actual canvas itself, but what I will pretty much always do is go over that outline with some blue ultramarine acrylic paint that has no medium within it whatsoever. It's not watered down, it's just blue acrylic paint. I use acrylic for this outline paint sketch thing because the drying time, to be honest. I'm very aware that this is going to be an ALLA PRIMA portrait painting, but ALLA PRIMA for me, doing the painting itself is done in the oils. This is just an outline and it's done with acrylic for this first beginning section. I did have a small hiccup around this point of time in the painting itself, and it's a little blooper which I thought would be nice to put into it. If you'd like to see that, you can scroll right to the very end of the video, or just stick around, hopefully you will anyway, but that blooper will be at the very end. I think you'll find it quite funny. But going over the outline itself with this blue acrylic paint, I often find helps create not the depth, but it helps me find out where the depth is going to be. You can see that where it's going to be darker and where those line structures are where the blue paint is, and going over it as well in order to make that white canvas, toned canvas with this acrylic burnt umber as well. I'm going over this with burnt umber, and I find the blue stands out from it a lot more than it would for what you'd normally put, which is the red base down. But I personally prefer blue. If you don't, work with what you can, because it makes very little difference. The only big difference the blue makes is that it stands out more, but if you're not using thick layers of paint, it will show through sometimes if you're mediuming down your paint with medium. So once I've done that, I go straight into using these oil paints. With the oil paints, I'm using that red and the black and mixing them together, and I'm using Liquin Original Medium for this, as I find it has a very nice slow drying time, but also will quickly make the painting sticky enough in order to add a tiny little layer extra if it needs to be, which is where you can go back and add some highlights in. So once I've put down that base layer for the background, I'm very happy with it and I don't go over it again. That's the point of ALLA PRIMA, is that you're not going to be doing layers upon layers of paint. You're doing one layer and that's it. I do go over it, however, with the brush just to smooth it out and get rid of any really sharp brush forms and values in there. So once I've done all of that, I go straight into the actual painting itself, and more often than not, I will often start from the left side of somebody's face, especially with the eye. I find the eye is one of the easiest things to mess up, but also the thing that will make or break a painting, to be completely honest. So I'll start with that eye and then I'll work in those skin tones. This is what I love so much about ALLA PRIMA method, and what I've always wanted to learn how to use it for, is that with ALLA PRIMA, that first brush stroke you put down with that tone and the value is what's going to be there at the end. That is what I think is really nice, and from the very beginning I was a sketch artist. I'm a realistic drawing artist. That's mostly what people know my art from, is doing realistic portraits. And so with drawing portraits, that's one of the things as well, is that you're building up these layers, but it's also one of the first tones that you put down is what's going to be there in the end. Quite often, portraits will be developed slowly over time and through layers, and the first layer will be blocking in, the second layer will be refining, and the third layer will be details. Whereas with ALLA PRIMA, that is it. What you put down is there. And so I think that's a really nice challenge to be able to have. I love being challenged in my paintings and artworks and being able to push the limits of what I thought I was able to do, which is why I'm always up for experimenting and always up for trying new techniques, new methods, new materials, whatever. And this is something that I've wanted to learn, and I've loved doing within this painting as well. I did also mention at the very beginning of the video, that I was using relatively cheap brushes. These brushes are something that, they were pretty much my first set of brushes, and I bought them off Amazon for something like £8, something like that. I'll leave a link to them anyway, but it was something that I also wanted to prove to people, that you don't need really expensive art materials to be able to create artwork. Yes, more expensive ones have much higher quality and they feel better for the artist, but overall, they're not going to make or break the world. In some cases, they may do, but in a lot of cases, you don't need expensive art materials to create decently good art, or just art in general. That was something that I struggled with when I first started out, and I'm sure an awful lot of other people have struggled with when they start out their art journeys and their art careers as well, is that you look at these paintings and go, wow, they must have had some of the most expensive art materials and some of the most expensive brushes on the market. And they really don't. A lot of the times their brushes are just as bad or just as good as my ones are here, which literally are an £8 set of brushes, and you get loads of them, and I think they work brilliantly. There's a lot of unique textures that you can get from these brushes, but also at the same time, yeah, they still work. That is the point, is that a brush is a brush. That is it. I will mention, however, when I got these brushes, I had to tape up the actual end to it as the end fell off, which I thought was quite funny, and I don't know why, but I've always stuck with these brushes. But I am going to be moving away from these soon to start creating better, bigger and larger paintings. So stick around for that and subscribe to see some of those artworks that I plan to create in the future. I spend an awful lot of my time working on the face and working into that depth and detail. Not too much detail, I will add, but I spend most of my time on that face and creating those facial features, as facial features are one of the biggest things that are easiest to mess up, but like I said as well with the eyes, if they work, they will make the painting. If they don't, they'll break the painting. It's as simple as that. But going down from her head, quite often I will work from top to bottom, as that works a lot nicer, and by the time you reach the bottom with this ALLA PRIMA method and the oil paints, by the time you reach that bottom, then the first place you put the oils down first will be not completely dry, but it'll be sticky. You'll be able to blend it a little more. It'll still be sticky enough to take on a tiny little layer of new paint. As you can see with this part as well, working on that arm is something that I found really, really fun to do. And as you can see from the original reference photograph on the tablet on the left hand side, is that it's faded in. It's not completely faded in, but it's blended in a lot. And that's something I thought would be really, really fun and interesting to work on in this painting itself as well. That is why I also chose Alla Prima, is that when using Alla Prima portrait, well, Alla Prima method in general, is that you can blend these textures and these skin tones together so nicely compared to having to layer. Because if you layer and you go, oh, I made a mistake, then you can just layer over it, and you can erase it with a rag as well, which is something that is quite nice. But I think it's definitely worth learning how to paint Alla Prima for anybody who wants to do art a little more seriously. And the whole journey through doing this Alla Prima portrait was so good to just learn and work out how paints work more as well. And you can see with the shoulder, creating that highlight and being able to blend it into the paint that was around it the entire time was something that worked really, really nicely for me. That is why Alla Prima is, I think it could be a new favourite method of mine to work with, and as well, it's very, very quick. This portrait in total, which was painted on an A2 canvas, took me about 3 days, something around 38 hours, somewhere around that. Let's call it 37 hours, which isn't an awfully long time, but thoroughly enjoyable, because if I had have left this for weeks or months, then the paint would have dried and it wouldn't be Alla Prima. And that's why you work quickly, you work fast, and you work accurately, because you don't have time to go back and erase those mistakes. That is it. So that one working on the hand, you won't ever see me go back to the hand. But I am going back to this arm because a little bit of that, a little bit of the skin texture wasn't blended in for me. And so if I made a mistake, I can go back, I can blend it in a little more. Unfortunately, if you overblend, it's very hard to unblend the paint, so you do have to be fairly accurate with it. Now, this brush didn't come in that packet of brushes that I bought off Amazon a while ago. This was an old brush that I had, and it's very, very bristly, but I thought it created some nice skin textures and tones and helped to put in some of those paints more. So as you can see, I'm now going in to create the hair, and once I've put in that hair, you can really see all of the tones pop out a little more. They really seem to come alive a little bit. And I'm using these old bristly brushes, which did come in the packet as well, I will mention. These brushes are really, really nice, and they're a little bit bristly, which works so well for creating these hair textures. And you can see on the hair itself that you're not going truly in detail with like a 000 brush, single hair brush to create each individual hair, but it looks like it, which is something I love to be known as the illusion of detail, which is where I've used this large brush to create these smaller hairs, which is something that I thought was really, really fun and I just love to do. After that, I just go back in a tiny little bit with that bristly brush just to smooth in and blend in some more of those skin tones and textures. But that is it. That is literally the whole painting done in about 20 minutes. It took me 3 days. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much for watching. Digby just loves to jump up onto my palette sometimes, and he's quickly swept off.